Hello and welcome from us. This week, a focus on transport and a mayor rebuffed over the railways. And later on, 4 other big cities have just banned diesel vehicles. Why is Sadiq Khan refusing to go down the same route? With me, Mark Field, Conservative MP for the cities of London and Westminster, and Rushanara Ali, Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow. Welcome to you both. Let's start with that vote, that first vote this week in Parliament on Article 50. Rushanara Ali, you voted against triggering it, one of the few Labour MPs to do that. Why?
Well, I felt that the idea of a plan wasn't clear enough. I believe that we should have a white paper and we shouldn't be committing to 30th of March to trigger Article 50 without some clarity on the direction of travel and what the government is going to propose. And I just think it was a hostage to fortune. That's why I felt it would be wrong to support it. We need to make sure that we act in the national economic interest, and that's why I didn't feel I could support the government's amendment. And also I did not appreciate my own party adopting the government's amendment. That's why I didn't support either.
Mark, you were very clear. You were for Remain, and your constituents were as well. Don't you have any kind of pangs when you just go ahead and start that process now?
No, I mean, I think the timetable, to try and reassure Rushanara, at least, the reason that we're triggering by the end of March is such that we will not, because of the 2-year timetable, have European elections in June of 2019. I think people would be dismayed if we were voting for more MEPs, even for a short period of time. My view was, I mean, I was disappointed with the outcome, but had it been 52-48 the other way, I would have expected the losing side to play ball. And I think the reality of the situation is that, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think I will have more impact by trying to make Brexit work, and particularly obviously with the City of London being in my constituency, to make financial services be as high as we can in the agenda when it comes to looking at this. So that's really the basic reason why I thought I will support the government and do my best from the inside rather than shouting from the beyond.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Let's move on. So, interesting week for the Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling. On Tuesday, he rejected the Mayor's bid to take over overground train services running through South East London. Sadiq Khan hadn't made a persuasive case, he said. The next day, he was facing calls to resign after it was suggested he never intended to hand over more control to a Labour Mayor. Tanjil Rashid fills us in on the week's shenanigans.
London's suburban rail services, part of the confusing patchwork of train services Londoners use every day. In January, plans were agreed between the government and the last mayor to pass control of some of those services to TfL. Since then, Sadiq Khan was elected mayor, saying he'd do the same. Now those plans appear to have been ditched by the current Transport Secretary. Chris Grayling this week rejected proposals to devolve the South Eastern franchise to TfL, angering MPs on his own side.
My constituents will regard his failure to remove the London Metro services from the wholly discredited South Eastern franchise as being a complete cop-out and failure, and certainly no sense at all as far as rail users in my constituency or I am concerned.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know my honourable friend feels passionately about this, but I don't agree with him. We will have the opportunity between London, my department and Kent to design an improved franchise for the future.
In a statement to Sunday Politics, a Department for Transport spokesman said,
"The Mayor's business plan for the South Eastern franchise did not provide more frequent trains, it provided no extra capacity in peak hours, and it promised infrastructure improvements with no funding identified."
And that
MPs and councillors had raised concerns about the Mayor being given control over services for people who could not vote for the Mayor.
But the government's motives have been called into question this week after a letter from 2013 was leaked, in which Chris Grayling told the then Mayor Boris Johnson that he would like to keep suburban rail services out of the clutches of any future Labour Mayor. It sparked calls for the Transport Secretary to resign.
He's not frankly told the truth about his motives, because it's clear now from this letter that he has a long-standing prejudice against the idea of a Labour Mayor ever having control of the trains. That's not a legitimate reason for taking his decision. That's a serious error of judgment, and I think therefore he should resign.
The turf war between City Hall and the government over London's suburban rail services continues. How will Sadiq Khan respond?
Well, he's very disappointed, and so I think is the Deputy Mayor for Transport, Val Shawcross, who's here. And welcome to you. Presumably you're very disappointed. You accept that's it?
I'm
We're hugely disappointed. I think the Secretary of State has turned down an opportunity to make life easier for South Londoners, to improve the economy, to even improve, you know, the housing performance in South London. It's really difficult at the moment in South London. If you're a commuter, you know, Southern is in meltdown, and of course South Eastern has not been very good at all.
And you're not saying for a moment that Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary, doesn't think that or know that. But the point is, as we heard in the piece, and let's repeat it, you know, you didn't put forward any plans to provide more frequent trains, no extra capacity in the peak hours. And where are the promised infrastructure improvements? You haven't got the money for those. I mean, if you were to improve things, he might let you take them over.
The business plan we put in, and it was a really detailed account of how we could improve South Eastern services, was a really strong cost-benefit ratio. It would have improved services dramatically. And if you look at TfL's track record in running the TfL Overground, running now the West Anglia line, there's been a massive improvement in the number of passengers using those services.
But there's a fundamental difference, isn't it? Because the Transport for London Overground, you put a lot more money into infrastructure. You spent a lot of money on that, and this time one's saying that, so you're not comparing like with like, are you?
What we're talking about is actually changing the whole way the railway is run, from this rather lackadaisical franchise to a very tightly controlled contract, a concession, with better staffing, better trains, better reliability, and we can, as we move on, actually improve some of the frequencies.
But they want to. He's making it quite clear he wants you to be involved in a partnership. I'm just saying, how would it be clearer to the average viewer? I mean, there is this democratic deficit idea, isn't it? I mean, why should people, Conservative voters out of London area, be, you know, in hock, if you like, to a Labour mayor and paying his fares or under his conditions? But you would, under this arrangement, you'd have to split this franchise into two, wouldn't you? So the long-running services would still remain in another franchise. You'd have this franchise that you were in charge of. Both of these people trying to negotiate and work with Network Rail. It makes it more complicated, doesn't it?
Well, you know, I think we've got plenty of experience of showing how we can make this work. And in fact, representatives from outside of London were really keen on this as well. We had letters of support from Surrey, from Kent, from Hertfordshire. Sevenoaks borough councils were really disappointed too about this decision, because they're very dependent on this commuter line. We had, in the business plan, made arrangements to start this work. We could have done this on a cost-neutral basis for the government, and we would really like an independent assessment of the business plan, because we feel it absolutely stacks up. And so we're not going to take no for an answer on this, because it's too important to the lives of people in South London and the economy in South London.
And Mark Field, there's a certain Bob Neal, Conservative MP Bob Neal, feels exactly that as well. Who's right here, him or Chris Grayling?
Well, I think I'm on Chris Grayling's side on this. I fully understand Bob's irritation. He's really speaking as a voice of his constituents in southeastern trains, in southern trains. You're right, there is this democratic deficit. The notion that essentially the Medway towns, Sevenoaks, even as far as Guildford for southern trains, would essentially be, as you've put it, in hock to a London mayor, is not a great situation. I accept the London Overground goes beyond the M25 into Waltham Cross and Cheshunt and places like that in South Hertfordshire, and that has been a success, but that has had the money that has been devoted to it. This is a mess, and I think people have made a lot of what Chris Grayling said. I think he was making a valid point 3 years ago, which is, with a lot of changes that are being proposed, think it through when a Tory mayor is asking, how would you feel if it was under a Labour mayor? And the issue is, in part, because the Labour Party relies upon union funding. The RMT, one of the most militant unions, would be saying, right, here we are, we'll sort out those Surrey and Kent commuters, we'll give them a hard time.
So can I just make it clear? So Mark Field, you're saying you support someone being predisposed, being prejudiced on this matter, because he has already decided that he is not going to
that, and B, that's not.
How do you defend those remarks he made?
They were remarks made 3 years ago and he was saying, not being prejudiced about it, but just saying, listen, think again. If there are a whole lot of powers that any mayor, of course a mayor of London wants to have more powers, and some of those powers in transport will necessarily be beyond London's boundaries. But think through the implications.
So we can't can't trust that he has looked very carefully at this business plan proposal from the mayor and assessed it without politicising it.
No, I don't think he's politicised it. I think the case has been made very clear that there is a problem. That there isn't the money there. There wasn't going to be an improvement in the day-to-day services. It was a fundamentally different set of state of affairs compared, to, as I say, to the London Overground changes in South Hertfordshire, where there was more money, where you only need to go up to those stations, as I have, to see the improvement in the quality of stations and indeed of the track. That wasn't going to be applying in South East London, and therefore, until such time as that plan is in place, I think it's quite right that Chris Grayling has said, hold back, we shouldn't do this.
Mark is getting himself into a real knot over this. The fact is, there's cross-party agreement on TfL and the Mayor of London having control over this. There is, what's not clear is why Chris Grayling is not focusing on the public interests and passengers' interests and making sure commuters have a better service. That's the priority. And it is absolutely politically motivated. Did he ask those questions of Boris Johnson when he gave him a blank cheque and said, "Fine, you can be in charge, but if it's a Labour mayor, you can't."
This is exactly why he didn't give Boris the power, because
the point is that Chris Grayling is not prioritising the interests of commuters. He should be focusing on that instead of politicising this matter. And Bob Neal is spot on. And
we've had that point. Let me turn to you, because in this week, Sadiq Khan and you have produced a business plan for Transport for London. And Sadiq Khan has been describing Transport for London as flabby, and you can make all kinds of cuts. £4 billion of cuts, apparently, you can find over 5 years or 4 years. Why on earth would Chris Grayling pass control of a franchise to such a flabby, such an inadequate organisation?
Do you know, it's difficult to see what's actually changed since the government in the early part of the year agreed in a partnership document that there would, between Boris and Patrick McLaughlin, actually allow TfL to take control of these franchises and commission these services.
Well, I'll tell you, there's one thing. You can now see that TfL is flabby, and we hear that from the Labour mayor. He says they're not fit to.
We have put forward a really detailed business case that's jumped through all of the hoops. And the business plan we've just put in place is a very tightly managed business plan, and we know we can run this service better. I think if you ask the passengers of South London what they think, they would like.
Right, I'm asking you now about the 5-year investment plan, and the mayor describing TfL in effect as not fit for purpose at the moment and not having found the cap. So why would you think, when you're finding all those cuts, why would you be given another service to run?
It's a very good and strong organisation, but it is ripe for reform. It's an organisation with 12 layers of management within it. I'm sure the BBC doesn't even have that many layers of management. We're going to take it down to 7. So, it is an organisation where we think that some of the contracts have been gold-plated in the past. It is an organisation with some duplication within it because it was made up of a number of precursor. We can find a lot of savings within this organisation, and we've been very public about what we're doing and how we're doing it. Nobody has questioned, no serious questions have been put about the business plan that really seriously challenge it. We would like this to be publicly examined. We would like an independent assessment to be done on it.
All right.
Let the court of real professional judgment and public opinion decide this case.
Brilliant, we made that point. Let's move on. Stay with us. 4 big international cities have just announced they're going to impose a ban on diesel vehicles. Presumably London's mayor and his deputy mayor here will be wanting to do the same, given how much emphasis he's been placing on tackling air pollution and saving lives. Well, no, actually, as Dan Friedman reports.
4 out of the last 10 days here in London have had high or very high pollution levels, prompting these warnings at bus stops for the first time. And it's the most vulnerable who are most at risk, according to the World Health Organization. So we've been to speak to children at a school in Hackney.
When I breathe in, it doesn't taste very nice. I had a really bad cough for the whole week. And I did see a bit of black in the air. I kind of got a bit scared.
A couple of cars went by, and then as soon as they rushed by, it's just like you could hardly breathe because the air was so thick. It kind of worries me.
My son also had to take extra puffs of his inhaler. He was coughing more in the evening. And that follows a pattern that I've seen over the last couple of years since his diagnosis as asthmatic, that whenever there's a spike in air pollution, he's coughing more, wheezing a little bit more. It can be managed with his use of inhalers, but there's definitely an impact on health.
And it's diesel vehicles which are doing most of the damage, which is why campaigners are urging the mayor to ban them.
All sorts of traffic are bad, but diesel is the worst. and it's so dangerous for health that we really just have to get it off our streets. It's an old fuel, it's not the future.
Madrid, Paris, Athens and Mexico City have just pledged to ban diesel vehicles from their city centres by 2025. The mayor of Paris says it's due to 2,500 deaths a year caused by bad air. Across an albeit larger area here in London, the figure is nearly 4 times that amount, as a result of regular pollution episodes.
And today is one of those days. Unfortunately, we've got the perfect blend of slow-moving traffic, not much wind, and it means there's kind of a foggy, misty grime hanging in the air you can really taste. And to boot, we're getting a load of air over from Paris, which is also a polluted city. It's all adding to a pretty toxic mix here in London, sending our pollution levels incredibly high.
This week, City Hall assigned £875 million over 5 years to improve London's air quality.
This involves money to help clean up our buses, it's going to be cleaning up our taxis, it's going to help fund the bringing forward of the ultra-low emission zone.
But they've categorically ruled out a ban on diesel vehicles.
We don't feel that a ban is needed. That's not what we're asking the government to do. We feel a combination of the charging, the T-charge, and the bringing forward the ultra-low emission zone, plus incentives to clean up our vehicles, to move away from dirty diesel vehicles, is a better and faster way to go. But we need the government's help.
If you look at the toxicity charge, that's in central London, and it isn't on every single diesel vehicle. If you look at the ultra-low emission zone, it's only being expanded for all vehicles to around the north and south circular. So places in outer London are really not winning enough on this. So what's currently being proposed really isn't enough, and it really isn't commensurate with banning diesel in the city.
So a sense of frustration in some quarters, knowing full well what's at stake.
And Val, there's a letter here from all these organisations, Greenpeace, Clean Air, every single one of them saying, we like some of the signals of you and the current mayor on air quality, but ban it by 2025. Go ahead, why not?
We've got a really strong programme in place with the ultra-low emission zone and the T-charge, and we will make real achievements in reducing air pollution in London. It's not just focused on central London. I think that the point was wrong there, because although the ultra-low emission zone will come into central London hopefully 2019, which will cover all vehicles, in fact the ultra-low emission zone for heavy goods vehicles, including buses and coaches, will cover the whole of London for that time. So,
but what's the problem with the ban, that timeline thing, 2025? Why not a ban?
We've got a programme that we're sticking to because we've funded it, we've got the legal framework, we've got the consultations in place, and what's more, companies like the coach companies and the heavy goods vehicles operators have had warning in order to change their technology. What we don't want is a dash back to petrol, because of course that would have a carbon emissions impact. It's really important to try and get a transformation of technology.
So have you done a cost benefit analysis? Have you worked out how much the T-charge and the ultra low emission are going to bring in? Have you done a cost benefit analysis?
This is not about money. This is about cleaning up the air in London. We've actually put a big tranche of money in the business plan that we've got to fund the infrastructure and the programme that we'll need to enforce this and make sure it happens. So at the moment, at the front end, it's going to cost a lot of money, but that's okay.
But does this bring in more money than you doing a complete ban? Is that why you're doing it, to bring in the money?
It's absolutely nothing to do with money. The priority here is people's health. It's the centre of London and the main roads where we get the worst air quality, and Heathrow actually, by the way. Course, yes. So you'll see, as part of the plan that we've got, we'll have cleaned up every bus in London by the time of the ultra-low emission zone coming in. We've already got electric fleets coming in, and we're talking to heavy goods vehicles and coach operators. Yeah. So, this is going to have a big impact.
Rashana, wouldn't you want to see it come in a little bit sooner, or wouldn't you like to see a complete ban?
Well, look, I have been lobbying the previous mayor, as many London MPs, and what we saw at the time was him being in denial, withdrawing information about the worst affected areas, like in Tower Hamlets. I have one score which is the worst affected in the country. Nearly 10,000 people die a year in London, but it's a national problem as well, with 40,000 people nationally. So we need action both at the national level and London level. I'm really delighted that Sadiq has doubled the funding to help the enforcement.
OK, so you're broadly happy. Would you agree with that as well? That
I would like to see. I would like to see all options being explored.
But not a ban either.
I welcome what's been done so far.
Other cities are doing it.
There needs to be more urgency, and it was the same criticism I made of Boris Johnson as well. I mean, and the issue, of course, is that it was widely regarded that diesel was the safer option, and actually we now know that nitrogen dioxide, as opposed to the carbon thing, is in fact a much bigger problem for asthmatic young children and indeed adults for that matter, and it particularly applies in places like Knightsbridge, Euston and Marylebone Road in my own constituency. So I have quite a lot of sympathy with what Val is saying, and we don't want to rush into anything because that really was the trouble. We had this dash towards diesel and all the unintended consequences that have now come to play. And of course, a lot of people have been encouraged and incentivised through the tax system to go down the diesel route. I do think 2025 is a bit of a long shot. I hope that in time TfL will bring it forward. I think there is a little bit more urgency than saying 9 years' time for an outright ban. Let's
you two,
thanks
very much. Well, Val, we will have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Just about enough time to give you the political news in 60 seconds.
A record investment in cycling was announced by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, committing £770 million to improve cycling infrastructure and promote cycling in the capital over the next 5 years. City Hall claim the money allocated is double the spending on cycling made by previous Mayor Boris Johnson. A row has broken out between Jeremy Corbyn loyalists over proposals to split the Tottenham constituency in two. It is claimed that Labour's submission to the Boundary Commission was a clear attempt to ensure that Mr Corbyn retained his Islington seat by redrawing boundaries so that he faced the least competition. The Mayor of London has announced that step-free access on the Underground will get a financial boost, bringing the total number of stations with access to more than 100. The current level of 26% will rise to 40%.
Mark, central London, that cycle lane along the embankment, supporter of that then, like it?
Listen, I can understand the mentality that says we need to have a joined-up cycle lane, but the trouble is there's been a huge amount of congestion as a result of reducing the number of lanes in what is already a very busy road. There's a particular problem in my constituency as well, around the Bayswater Road into Lancaster Gate area. That really has become very, very problematic. So, you know, we all have constituents who are at us about the amount
So should he be brave enough to review and maybe even tear them out if necessary?
No, I think what he should do is look at where the disruption is and make sure that's dealt with quickly, because Boris introduced the cycle lanes and it was all done very quickly, and that has caused a lot of frustration among drivers but also cyclists. I think the thing that I'm keen to see is more emphasis on cycling safety, which is a big issue, and HGV vehicles, which is still the biggest factor.
A lot to get into. We've got through a lot today. Running out of time to both of you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Andrew. Back to you.